Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret, and today I am talking to Dr. Lynn Koegel. She is the co-author of Hidden Brilliance, Unlocking the Intelligence of Autism. Lynn is a clinical professor at the Stanford School of Medicine. She and her husband developed pivotal response treatment, which focuses on motivation. She has been supporting autistic individuals for more than 40 years. Welcome, Dr. Lynn Koegel.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And so, although we are talking generally about children with autism today, I urge you to listen to this. First of all, almost certainly you have a child with autism somewhere in your life, but also, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that as a mom with a kid on the spectrum, I find that so much of what I learn about helping kids with autism applies in so many situations. There are so many kids who don't have autism who still struggle with transitions, who still may have particular sensitivities. And so I think for our audience, even if you don't have a child with autism living in your home, there will be good takeaways for you from this episode.
I think that's so important that you mention that, because some of the research that we've done on behavior especially suggests that children don't have behavior issues because they're trying to be naughty or things like that. They have behavior issues because they're trying to communicate. And that's kind of true across the board. So there's a lot of things we've learned from children with autism, and it is just a spectrum. All the children have some behaviors that the children with autism do, but a lot of the things, most of them are relevant to all children.
I think that's so important, and something that I really liked about this book. We talked to Dr. Becky, who her thesis is Good Inside. That's the name of her book. And that the idea of approaching kids are good inside. And so therefore, what we're always trying to figure out is what's blocking that? What's in the way of that? What's making it difficult for them to communicate? And I found it really touching in this book, and I have had this experience myself, that I think a lot of times kids with autism, we struggle a little bit more sometimes to see past this diagnosis and past the behaviors that can be challenging. These kids are also good inside. And figuring out, and you sort of start with this idea of connection and interests and how to begin the process of connecting with kids with autism. So let's start there.
Great. Well, we know years ago when I first started in the field, we didn't consider the kids' interests at all. And there's still a lot of programs that are somewhat like that, where they're just not really considering the kids' interests. But we feel like autism, a large part of the issue is a motivation problem. Things are hard for them. It's early communication is hard. And so they really need to be motivated to want to engage, because it is so easy to try to avoid if something's challenging. So we really try to look for where their interests are. And I think this is kind of true of all children. Like we know even children with are late talkers or language delays, if you use their interests and go for what they're playing with or what they're doing or what they're interested in, that we'll have a lot more success. And I guess even children that don't have any diagnosed issues, also, same thing. I think all of us remember back to school, the times that we remember the most are the ones where we did a really fun project rather than sitting doing page after page after page of a workbook. So I think just really looking for kids' interests is so important, and especially children with autism who tend to avoid or try to escape learning situations because it's difficult. We've found that if we do focus on their interests in the intervention, we don't really need to worry about any interfering behaviors. They just kind of drop out by themselves. They're not trying to avoid or escape the situation.
I read a description a long time ago. I should have cited the author, but I don't remember who it was, talking about reaching kids with autism. And they were talking about how if I saw you sitting in a park and I wanted to go to a movie and I walked up and you were reading a J.D. Salinger novel and I walked up and slapped it out of your hand and said, we're going to the movie, that you would think, I don't want to do that. I'm doing the thing I want to do. And then it used the example of, if I really wanted you to come to the movie, I might sit next to you reading another J.D. Salinger novel for a long time until you noticed. Then we would start talking about J.D. Salinger. Then I would make the connection. Oh, there's this movie playing that reminds me of his characters. And that the idea of connecting interest to activity, I think, can seem very intellectual, but that example really spoke to me of, okay, I want you to get from here to there, but it's going to take more steps than just, hey, let's go to a movie, because my go with the flow kid might be like, yes, I would love to, but my kid on the spectrum and my kid who is neurotypical both need a little more convincing than that. And so you use a lot of examples in your book of actual children that you have worked with. Give us an example of connecting through interest.
Well, I think that we can do it in a lot of different areas. So usually the first thing that parents notice when they feel like something, when they seek out help is when their children aren't talking. They may have noticed a few things before, like some eye contact or affect, but usually when they're not talking, or don't start talking or lose words is when they first kind of reach out for help. And that early communication is so important. If we try to make children fit into what we want them to say, they're not going to be motivated to talk. And most kids that are learning language as they should on those milestones, they might be saying mama and dada and auntie and doggy and things like that. But our kids sometimes their first word will be cookie or something on if they want to turn the light on and off. And it's so important, even if sometimes people get worried if it's a behavior that they don't like the child will turn lights on and off. But we've learned from the research is that it's okay to use that interest, even if it doesn't seem like it's what other children without autism might be interested in. It's okay to learn that. You can have them say on and then turn on the switch. So you're really just getting into their own interest, getting those learning opportunities. And later on, when the kids get into school, the same thing pertains. For example, if the kids have to write a story, sometimes a teacher will say, I want you to write a story about your summer vacation. But our children might want to write a story about Pokemon. And as long as they're learning to write, it's more important that they have their interests involved. They'll have less avoidance behavior. They'll come to the table quicker. They'll do more work. So it's really important, even like math, if they're not interested in learning, to add numbers on a worksheet, but they are interested in learning how much things cost and adding numbers that way, you can kind of incorporate that. So just really figuring out what their interests are and incorporating those into as many learning situations throughout the day as possible.
I think that's really true. And I also think it can be hard for parents, and I speak for myself, that sometimes when you have a kid who's struggling with anything, but in this case, let's talk about an autism diagnosis, to feel like your goal is to make your child act like a quote unquote normal child. And so therefore, like normal children go to the zoo and you point to the animals and they say the name. But if my kid's interest does not lay there, that it's just going to be a frustrating situation for both of us, and that I'm going to come away from that situation saying, my kid doesn't have a fun day at the zoo, and therefore I'm robbed of that experience, and we're not having a good time, and everything's going terribly. That to be able to lean in, it's finding where that experience lives for your kid versus for yourself, I think, which can be hard. That it may not seem interesting enough to turn the fan on and off and talk about that for a long time, because the regular kids are at the zoo. And I think that it's, Amy often says, the pain is in the gap. And I think for me, sometimes the pain was in the gap, that like the zoo is good and the fan is not good. And that letting those things be morally neutral was challenging for me. Do you find that for a lot of parents?
Yes. And I think there's so many things involved in what you just said. One thing is that I don't think as a culture we've embraced these children well enough to make the parents feel comfortable and really come as a society to help and chip in. And the parents, a lot of the families, and we talk about this in our book, a lot of the families feel more and more isolated because they feel like they can't go to the zoo, or maybe they might have a behavior problem if they go to the park, or maybe if there's an ambulance that goes by, they might have a meltdown. So they just avoid, and their lives become even more isolated. And that's exactly what we don't want. We really want the kids to be out there. And just giving you an example of the kids need socialization. They have difficulty with socialization. So we need to, work on that and learn ways to help them be more social, because as we know, verbal adults with autism say they want to have friends. And it's harder to make friends when you haven't had help with that all the way along. And so I had a child recently that I was working with at a preschool, and he loved to sit there and open and close the door. That he'd lay on his side and just close the door to the playhouse over and over and over again. But the other kids kind of are interested in doors if you call them over. So we said, hey, come over here. Look, this little guy's opening and closing the door. Let's talk about it. And they were taking turns opening and closing the door. We talked about hinges. We talked about doorknobs. We talked about all kinds of things. So a lot of these activities that are special interests that maybe you wouldn't think would be so interesting with the kids that don't have an autism diagnosis, you can tweak them a little bit to make them interesting and then have those social goals. So, there is the idea that we can take these interests and turn them into social things. We do this with clubs. We've developed lots of clubs around the kids' interests. And in fact, they're usually voted the president of the club because they have so much knowledge on this particular subject. And I think I wrote in the book about a little guy that I work with now that scores below the 5th percentile on all the language tests. But he knows everything about drains, everything. I mean, he's so interested in drains. Every time he sees one, he's down on his hands and knees, and it's like incredible how much he knows about drains. So tapping into some of those interests and turning them into a social activity is very important.
I want to pause on that. We're talking to Dr. Lynn Koegel, the co-author of Hidden Brilliance, Unlocking the Intelligence of Autism, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
At DSW, we ask the important questions, like, what shoes are you going to wear? Whether you're prepping for wedding season, festival season, or just planning the ultimate vacay, the right shoes can make or break an RSVP. So own the moment. You've got big plans, and we've got just the shoes. At the perfect price, of course. Get ready to get ready with Designer Shoe Warehouse. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today and let us surprise you.
Well, I'm coming in hot to say it is worth taking care of your skin. It's worth finding the right products to keep your skin smooth and hydrated. Let me tell you, I have tried many products, and time after time, I come back to Osea.
Amy, same. Osea just sent us their anti-aging body balm to try. It combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving my skin smoother, firmer, and beautifully supple.
Osea's body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel. Since using this product, I really have noticed firmer and smoother skin, backs of my hands, knees, elbows. It really helps.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com. There are so many examples in this book that I think are really helpful. I think sometimes, the language around autism has changed to some degree, and you'll hear autism is a superpower and it actually makes you special. All things that I happen to believe. But I think when we get too facile with them, we're skipping the important work that you're talking about of actually facilitating these connections. And my sister-in-law, who's an educator, was telling me when one of my guys was struggling in elementary school, the day is set up in elementary school in a way that is almost maximally difficult sometimes for kids with autism. Because she said, as an adult, nobody says to you, okay, Margaret, it's art time, 40 minutes of art. Okay, stop art now. You're done. Like, oh, you were into your painting? Yeah. Too bad. Put it away. It's time for archery. Like, archery? What? Okay, I guess I'm shooting arrows now. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, now it's time for English. Now social studies. And that some of those things I'm not interested in it at all. Some of those things I'm interested in and don't want to stop just because there's an arbitrary time limit. Some of those things other kids are really good at and I'm terrible at it, and that makes me feel bad. Yeah. And then some of those things I'm super interested in, and then a bell rings and no more of that for me. And that's nothing like how adults live their lives. I get up in the morning and I do the one thing I'm pretty good at, which is make a podcast and run a company about podcasting all day. And then I make dinner, which I'm medium good at, and then I relax. And so I think that this book taps into, just first of all, recognizing the water that the kids live in, recognizing the environment and where the environment is difficult, but then also connecting them to learning in a way that I don't see happening as much as I wish.
I think that's really important. And I think we tried to write the book to bring out the best in every child, because some children, we do see these really strong skills where they're really good at math or really good at music. But some children, we don't really see them right off the bat. Like my nephew, we didn't really, when he was younger and nonverbal and at 2.5, nobody saw that he had a lot of interfering behaviors such as throwing toys. And I noticed that he could put them together so quickly. And I thought, this kid is really smart. And I've had 2 kids in the last couple of years that I've worked with that people said they're never going to start using verbal communication. And after 2 years, they started using words. And that was 2 years of really working on those words. So but we kind of had a feeling because we could see that they could tune into certain pictures and visual things. So we had a feeling that they had some capabilities. And while some kids will start saying first words in the first session, other kids take a lot longer. So regardless of the behavior, I think it's important to just really try to look at what these areas of strength are. And we're just so used to, especially my profession and other professions that work with special needs children, or children with differences, I should say. We're kind of trained to look for what's wrong. We're not trained to write and look for what's right. And that gives us a really good starting point to really look at all these things that are going well. And then we have a place to start and say, what can we do based on these things that the children are doing well?
And will you tell that story from the book? Because it really spoke to me about your nephew being assessed and breaking the toy, and what you saw in that experience, which was different than what the assessors saw.
Yes. So in our very first session, when he was getting diagnosed by the state, this was back when California state paid for services. Now they go through the insurance, but they had some assessors from the state come out to his house, and we had this ramp that he loved to put the balls down. It was taller than him, and he'd reach up, put the balls down, and watch them roll down. And the assessors were saying, does he say any words? And he had said an echolalic word here and there. So I thought, well, you never know. So I held up the ball and said, ball, to see if maybe we could get him to say that before I gave it to him. And he got really frustrated. And he took the toy, picked it up, and threw it down as hard as he could. And it must have gone into at least 20 or 30 pieces. They were all over the floor. And when it's somebody that's that close to your heart, you really pick up on the emotions of the assessor. And I saw their eyes get big, and step back and like, oh, kind of moan. You could just feel that they didn't really want to be in this room with this.
Not the right choice. Yeah.
So, but then he looked horrified that the ramp had broken into so many pieces, and he put it together so quickly. I could not believe it.
Your nephew did, this little boy. Yeah.
My nephew did. He put it together, and I would have had to get out the manual or Google the manual because I had no clue of how to put together. But the report came back and didn't even mention that. All it mentioned was his, disruptive behaviors and other few disruptive behaviors that he had that, to me was this idea that he could put together this puzzle or this, maze was so incredible that should have been like the first paragraph. But he did do well. I mean, looking at those strengths, it was a lot of effort. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not like you can take him to the zoo and they're going to learn because you just talk about things. We do have to set up these opportunities. We try to have the opportunities in everyday routines, so the parents don't feel stressed about, oh no, I got to sit down and work with my child. We try to have parents learn how to do opportunities throughout their everyday routines. But getting back to our original point, we did a lot of work with him. He's in college now. He did really well. His teachers loved him. He's the nicest person you could meet. I mean, probably I would say that most of the people with autism that I know are the nicest people you could meet.
Yeah. What I like about that story, and I think I keep coming back to it because for me, this was the aha of the book, is that I feel like with neurotypical children, the kind of, okay, we've solved a lot of stuff and now we're on to communicating through difficult behaviors, be it with our teenagers, our 2-year-olds, but that somehow some special needs, especially autism, has been left behind in that. Like, well, we've got to stop that rocking that they're doing and get them to focus on the blackboard. And it seems to me that this book, it really is about, I've had this experience with my own child who in first grade, I was told by a teacher, like, well, he doesn't even know his sight words, because that's what we care about, the sight words. And I said, do me a favor. Tomorrow, if you have a quiet moment or have one of the aides, go sit within the back, hand him a book he's never seen before. He'll read it to you. He doesn't care about sight words because that's not how he learns. He knows how to read, but he doesn't either. I don't know if it's a lack of capability. I don't know if it's a lack of interest, but yes, he does not want to stand while you recite words. On the flip side, I understand that they're trying to manage 25 kids in a classroom and that a kid who, needs to be reached in a very special way makes that difficult. So I wonder what you think about in terms of the dynamic within a classroom. Inclusion, is it, we've been pushing for inclusion, which I think is very important to have kids mainstreamed and with their peers. At the same time, is it costing some opportunities for kids who could use more specialized, perhaps, instruction?
Well, I think as an educator, I can take some of the blame on this as I'm not sure that we always teach our teachers properly. I like the idea of inclusion. I like everybody being together. All children have challenges in some area. There's no such thing as a perfect kid or a normal kid or a typical kid. Any parent that tells you their kid is perfect.
I think we've got that. Yeah, no, I think everyone's nodding. We got it. Yes.
We all, as parents, we all go through ups and downs with our children, and they have weaknesses and strengths. And I think that the children with autism, I think as educators, we haven't gotten to the point where we're really training our teachers well enough in individualization. Every single 25 or 30 kids in that classroom is going to be at a different level. And I think if the teachers learn to individualize it, it helps all the children in the class. And it's kind of like a little, when you're washing the dishes, if you have a little tiny baby, you're not going to have them put the glass in the dishwasher, but you might have them put their plastic plate or their plastic fork in there. So they're learning these activities, but kind of at their own level. And I think this inclusion, if we really want individuals with autism to be employed, which is good for the whole, everybody, we need to be able to include them from early on, as often as possible and as much as possible. And I think something that we talk about in the book that's really underused is the peers. There's a lot of good articles, research, tons of it on peer mediation and peer-assisted techniques. And I found that from preschool all the way up through college, there is such a nice group of peers that really want to help. So when little kids, if I'm working on verbal communication in preschool, they'll come up and say, "What are you doing?" I'll say, we're helping them learn how to say words. And they'll get right in there and they'll help. And some of them are actually very good. And then all the way through the lifespan, even in college, we had a program where we helped college students that felt like they'd like some help with socializing. We paired them up with peer mentors just to have that support when they went to clubs around their interest or when they went on outings. And there were a lot of great friendships created that way. And it's really good. The research on the peers show that it's really helpful to peers. It gives them more empathy. It gives them that feeling of accomplishment when they can help. And they also get a lot of extra support and attention from helping their peers that have needs in certain areas and helping support them. So I think with the large numbers of kids being diagnosed with autism these days, I think we're really going to have to reach out and get more peer support going. And it's really important. I mean, adults talk to children differently than children talk to children. We're a little bit more accommodating, and sometimes kids find it easier to talk to adults than they do to other children. But if the peers get the right support and learn how to really support their friends with autism, it can make a really big difference.
There's a great example in the book. I want to take a break and we'll be back. We're talking to Dr. Lynn Koegel, the co-author of Hidden Brilliance, Unlocking the Intelligence of Autism.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Hey there, I'm Kendra Adachi, and my show, The Lazy Genius Podcast, helps you be a genius about the things that matter and lazy about the things that don't, and you get to decide what matters. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to give you a new way to see. Episodes of the Lazy Genius Podcast are full of compassionate time management tips and permission slips to do what makes sense for you. New episodes drop every Monday. Follow and listen to the Lazy Genius Podcast on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
There's an example in the book. This is something else that I think is very important when we talk about peer support, peer education, whatever it happens to be, that the default can sometimes be this kid is doing, a good service by being kind and nice to this kid with autism as a favor. And one of the things that you talk about in this Unlocking Brilliance is you use the example of the kid playing with the doors. Hey, let's all learn about hinges. This kid knows everything about drains. Let's have this kid explain drains to everybody one day. There was another example in the book. I can't remember what the topic was. I think something in maybe even physics, something that a kid understood, and centering the kid with their knowledge so that there is a feeling of this child has something to offer and something to gain from this friendship versus these are kids that we are somehow, taking on volunteer hours to interact with.
Right. And I think it's so important to really carefully pick the peer mediators because they have to have more than just wanting to volunteer. We really want to pick kids that are in it for the right reasons. And I think you're right. I mean, looking at the strengths too of the children with autism, too often I've had a few kids that were very visual. And even though their communication was quite delayed, they learned how to read very young. So we had them read stories to the class in kindergarten so the other kids would know that they have these strengths. And no matter how small or how large they are, a lot of times it's really helpful to go in to look at when you go in and set up these peer groups to talk to them about what are their favorite things, what are their strengths. So we really want to focus on the strengths. And then again, really pick kids that have the right reason, not that want a college, letter for college or something on their resume, but really sincerely love to interact with all different people and want, a lot of times kids like those structured activities. I mean, there's a lot of kids out there that aren't diagnosed with autism that, okay, recess is okay, but they don't feel like it's meaningful to them. And when you give them something meaningful to do that's structured, I remember my own kids used to love the days that they had structured activities at lunchtime. They'd have dances and dance groups or something, and they love those things. So a lot of kids really do like to have those structured activities. And a lot of them will end up going into the field of autism eventually. And it's great for them to get that experience. And like I said, the literature shows that it really gives those kids without autism a sense of accomplishment. They feel good about themselves. They feel good about what they're doing. So there are a lot of kids out there that maybe do like to have things, feel like they're doing something constructive during those free periods.
And we talked a little bit about this, but I want to make sure to really highlight, because it's so much of what really spoke to me in the book, using motivation, tapping into motivation as opposed to just being overwhelmed by behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about your process? And then also, because I think the behaviors can't be taken out of the situation. If you have a kid who's raging a lot, it can be hard to do anything else. So we can't be facile and say, well, just focus on their strengths. Don't worry about the behaviors. If the behaviors are so disruptive that they're disrupting your life. But there is a connection between connecting with the motivation and changing the behaviors, correct?
Yes. And I think the first thing I like to do when I see behavior problems is to see how the teaching is going. Because oftentimes, I have a lot of parents that tell me when the providers drive up to their home, the kids run and start crying. And they shouldn't be crying. They should be excited because we're using their favorite toys and their favorite activities. And so I think the first thing I like to look at is the teaching fun for the child. We've done several studies and showing that if children have activities that they like and it's preferred, that the disruptive or interfering behaviors will kind of drop out on their own. So really that's number one. But I also really advocate for a multi-component program. We know that these interfering behaviors, or whatever you want to call them, challenging or disruptive behavior, can really block a lot of opportunities for the children. So I'd like to also do a multi-component program if we see that happening. First thing I look for motivation. Are the kids having fun? Are they enjoying the curriculum or enjoying the activities? And tweaking that so they still have the same learning goals, but it's just being taught in a fun way. And then second, also to figure out what they're trying to communicate. So if they're trying to communicate that something's too hard, to teach them to say, or even if they don't have the verbal skills, to teach them a signal or a sign to indicate that it's too hard. Or maybe they are bored. We have a lot of kids that get bored, and maybe, to indicate that, we need to change the teaching a little bit to be able to be a little faster pace. And then there's other procedures that we can use. There's lots of procedures for behavior. I like to nip that in the bud. If those behavior problems are occurring, they can really have some long-term negative consequences. And the same thing for any child. We know that that's the same thing for any child. All of us who have kids know that we have our tantrums, And so they're really just getting the children to use their words, learn to replace those problematic behaviors with something that will communicate the same thing and are efficient and effective, not so difficult that the kids won't want to do them and will engage in that aggressive or disruptive behavior that works. It usually works. Too often, if something gets hard in school, the kids engage in disruptive behavior and they take them out of the classroom. So the kids just learn, yay, I just got out of class. Now I know how to not have to do it. So really a multi-component program. But first thing is making sure the kids are enjoying it, because that way you don't have to do a special program. It'll kind of drop out on its own. And then one more thing I'm going to add, because you talked a little bit about this earlier and I meant to say something, but I didn't, is some things aren't that big of a deal. Like we've learned that there's to have a diagnosis, you also have to have repetitive behaviors, restricted and repetitive behaviors. And sometimes there may be something like you or I might tap our foot or play with our hair. Sometimes they have little behaviors that don't interfere with learning and they're really not that big of a deal. It's not worth a big, huge program if they're not really interfering that much. That might be something where you teach the community that that's okay. It's a way they calm themselves or whatever, that it's not really that big of a deal, and then really focus on this more important things.
Yeah, I really was struck in this book because it took me, I started this journey 15 years ago and things have changed so much. And one of the things really I feel like thematically this book is about something that it took me a little too long to get to. It's okay that some of these behaviors exist, that you want to get at motivation and connection and not worry so much about, right, stop tapping your finger. I mean, I hum, I sit here while we record and I pull the cap off and on my pen. It just helps me concentrate. It's a self-stimulating behavior, as is a kid stimming with autism. And so I think that it just takes a very calm and, for lack of a better word, loving approach to finding what's best in all of our kids. And I really appreciate this book, even if you don't have a kid with autism, but especially if you do. Dr. Lynn Koegel's book, she's the co-author of the book, Hidden Brilliance, Unlocking the Intelligence of Autism. Lynn, tell us where we can find more about your work, find the book, and where people who are struggling with maybe a kid with autism can find some support from you.
The book is online. It's on Amazon. And we also have a website, hidden-brilliance.org. And it's really our hope in this book that people really change the way they think about children with autism. It is a momentum, but we really hope that this helps that momentum, where people really look for the strengths and look for teaching situations where the children will have fun and enjoy learning, so they want to learn more instead of wanting to avoid the situation, and really just look at those little areas of strength and focus on the great things that the kids have rather than what they need. Focus on what they have and what we can work with.
We will be linking to everywhere you can find Dr. Koegel and her book. And I will be buying some copies personally and handing them out to some schools and friends. Dr. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed it too.
This is a Monday.com ad. The same Monday.com designed for every team. The same Monday.com with built-in AI, scaling your work from day one. The same Monday.com with an easy and intuitive setup. Go to Monday.com and try it for free.